Hello there, and thanks for joining me again today on Dr. Teach Me to Parent. Got a great program today as we look at the disabled child in the home. And in this case, we're looking at blindness. And if you know somebody, or if you have somebody in your family that has a disabled child, or if somebody in your home is blind, give a call to that person or get them on the phone and tell them to listen. Tell them to watch the program today, because this will be a very informative program for them as well as for you. So think of it as something that you can do to help somebody today as we walk through our program for the next hour on looking at the disabled child in the home. In the case of today, we have Toni Eames with us, and her little dog, actually, Adora, is with us and on her side. So we are negotiating today kind of a delicate walk, but also you'll enjoy the talk, that we have today. Remember, we're building this on my book, Dr. Teach Me to Parent. You can get that at Amazon or on my website, www.booksbyhedberg.com. Now, let me start out with a quote and put this in perspective, as what I usually do for each program, and this kind of tells you where we're going to go today, all right? Here's the quote. Allow a dog and a boy to have anything they want, and you'll end up with a good dog and a bad boy. And I think that really puts it into perspective. We have Adora here as our dog for Toni, and I'm sure you give him everything he wants, so that he's a good dog to you.
Except she's a she.
But she's a she. Okay, we'll have to kind of remember that one today. Toni, welcome. Welcome to the program, and welcome to the chance now to get to know you a little bit, and for you to share your story, your life story with our family on television today.
Well, that's great.
So tell me this, kind of how did you start life? We have every family that has a child, mother is pregnant and she gives a child, and we always ask the question, do you want a boy or do you want a girl, or was it a boy or was it a girl? And usually the answer is yes, it's a boy, or yes, it's a girl. But really what parents want is a healthy child. And some ways you were not a healthy child.
Right.
That's the dilemma for your family. Tell us about that.
Well, I have a sister who's 3 years older than I, and my mother noticed certain things about me. I had limited vision. Actually, I had optic atrophy, and I had a childhood version of macular degeneration.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
And so my mother noticed if I dropped a rattle or a toy out of the crib, I wouldn't reach for it. It was out of my reach. And if a stranger came over and suddenly picked me up, I would scream because I didn't know who it was.
Sure.
And so she spoke to the doctors, and they said, "Oh, don't worry, all children are different."
Yes.
And it wasn't until I was about 3, when I didn't crawl the way most children do. Mm-hmm. I crawled by sitting on my bum and propelling myself, so I went feet first. And after a while, my mother realized that there was definitely something different about me.
You weren't able to watch anybody else crawl.
Right.
So you didn't learn how to crawl.
But I found out that most blind babies do that. It's just instinctive that you don't want to bump your head.
I guess it is kind of a self-protective kind of way of doing it. So you just kind of scooch along, I guess is the word, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. But, when your parents go to a doctor and they say, well, don't worry, this is just maybe an individual difference. I wonder what the difference would have been had the doctor really picked up on that earlier in life and said, okay, you have a child that's blind. Now here's what we do. We do this, and the other thing, and get a good start. I wonder if there was any kind of a lack there of a good start in life, just because you had 3 years of waiting.
I think it's unfortunate, but most doctors, even ophthalmologists, are not prepared to know what the services are. In a certain sense, they can deal with someone who's totally blind, but somebody who has limited vision, they almost think of it as their failure, that they haven't done something better with you.
They take some blame for that, or some sense of guilt.
Right.
Uh-huh.
Now, in my family, my mother was able to handle a lot of things that I needed to learn, whereas my father was very unaccepting. It was a very dysfunctional childhood.
Yes.
So where my mother would say, touch, find out what's in your environment, my father would slap my hand if he saw me touching things.
You wonder if that's kind of a common thing in parenting, and that is to feel like you can't touch that person because you're going to get something from them.
Well, it wasn't
It's almost
the
like
persons.
contractable disease.
It wasn't the persons. It was the items in my, what's on the table here, what's on the floor, what does this chair feel like? So it was
Yes.
not people, it was things. But my father would say, keep your hands in your lap. And my mother would say, well, how is she going to know what's in her environment if she doesn't touch things?
Yeah. Do you think that the disabled person like that, though, gets as much personal holding, touch, stroking, rubbing back, rubbing hair, rubbing arms, the kind of personal contact of one to the other? Or do you think that the disabled person is somewhat held at a distance?
I think it depends on the disability. Luckily, I had an uncle who was my father's substitute. I would sit on his lap and he would tell me stories.
Okay.
Whereas my father, only once I sat on his lap.
That's my point, I think,
Yeah, and I reached up and accidentally knocked out his glasses off. And so I never went to him for comfort. But my mother would come up with different things that she thought were good. And at the time, she didn't have the kinds of resources we have now.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
I think when a child cannot respond to you, for instance, a child with autism or a child who doesn't talk, it's much more difficult to give that kind of affectionate if you don't get it back from the
Well,
child.
every child needs affection, and they get it through touch. And if a child doesn't get an adequate amount of touching, stroking, then there's a deficiency. There's a need for it that is ongoing throughout life.
Absolutely. So when I was in kindergarten, they put me in a class for children who had limited vision.
Oh, yes.
And it was not until I finished the first grade that they realized that I could not see the large print. So certainly, if I couldn't handle first grade large print, I certainly wasn't going to go through school, reading. So at that point, I was in a public school, but I was in a class where I learned Braille. And that was fantastic for me.
Right from the very beginning, as
Yes.
a young child, Braille was brought into your life.
And unfortunately, so many parents who have children who have some vision want them to be so-called normal. So they don't introduce Braille, and they don't learn Braille sometimes until they're in high school or college, and then they wish that they had been able to
Sure.
do that. It's, Braille has been significant in my life.
Yeah. When you go back to your home, though, and you look at your first, 3, 4, 5 years, just before school, what was the unique thing about your family? What was the thing that stands out, for which you're grateful, and maybe even something that stands out for which you're not grateful?
Well, what I'm grateful for was my mother's willingness to make me independent. I lived in a New York City high-rise apartment, and there was a grocery store, not a supermarket, but a little grocery store right next door. And when I was 3 years old, my mother gave me a $1 bill and told me to get a container of milk and a loaf of bread. And she probably called the store ahead of time, I don't know, but they knew me. And I remember lugging this package up the stairs. I don't remember what things cost. I know there was change in the bag. And we lived on the 4th floor of a walk-up. And I remember the bag got heavier and heavier as I went up the stairs. But how proud of me I was that I did this by myself.
So independence, your parents...
My mother.
Really set more your mother.
Oh, yeah.
Really set the tone for your independence.
Yes. Now, my father set the tone for independence by telling me not to depend on anybody. So if I dropped something when I was playing in my room, I was not to call for help. He said, if you drop it, you find it. So in a sense...
Sounds cold, doesn't it?
It was very cold. It was very difficult. But that's, where I learned independence from a good way and then from a negative way.
From a negative way, yeah.
Yes.
I mean, the fact that you learned independence was the good thing.
Yes.
I mean, because that's really what you've lived on. That makes you thrive throughout life. That probably is true whether you're blind or not.
Absolutely.
And but especially if you're blind, you really have to have that sense of, I can do it.
Now, I had an aunt who was a psychologist, and one of the most meaningful things she said to me is, sometimes you're scared of doing things, but you do them anyway, and that's the important thing.
That's
you
what's
don't
important.
let the fear keep you from doing things.
Well, we're going to take a break here, Toni, and just take a commercial break for about a minute or two and give you a chance to kind of catch your thought, and we're going to move forward talking to Toni Eames, who is disabled and being blind. Her little dog is with us, Adora. She's not so little, actually. And she is enjoying the day and enjoying her day on television. There you can see Adora. And that's the one on which who you depend on a great deal in life today, don't you?
Yes, it's teamwork.
Okay, get a cup of coffee and come on back in about a minute or two, okay?
The Green Gables Care Home is a 24-hour assisted living facility for the elderly located in Clovis, California, offering spacious private and semi-private rooms which are wheelchair approved, catering to the special person in your life who needs attention and wants to live in a loving home environment. The Green Gables Care Home has assisted living in secured homes for elderly with Alzheimer's, memory loss, and for your loved ones needing assistance with their activities of daily living. Call 559-297-9438 and visit greengablescarehome.com.
Sometimes good intentions hurt rather than help. For just $1.76 per meal, the Fresno Rescue Mission offers more than food. We offer hope. Please donate today.
Do you need a locksmith? Layman's Lock and Safe Service and Repair is available for you. 559-228-1805.
Gained a lot, learned a lot, and got a lot of love. If it weren't for the knowledge that I had gained from the classes at PCC, I probably wouldn't be the mom I am today. See, there it goes.
I would love you to meet my son, Aaron. My situation was very difficult. I didn't know how my life was going to turn out.
We graduated in June 2010 and we got married in July. And through family, the Pregnancy Care Center changed our lives.
The Pregnancy Care Center was a huge, vital part in helping me walk through that pregnancy, in educating me and loving on me during that time.
Choosing a Medicare plan can be difficult and frustrating. Susan Hatch can guide you through the Medicare maze and help find the right plan for you. Susan helps people understand the confusing and drastic changes that occur every year in Medicare. Susan will only recommend plans that will protect your assets and allow you to continue to see your personal doctor. As a 100% independent agent, Susan is not controlled by any particular insurance company to steer a person onto any one particular plan. Susan was awarded the #1 Medicare supplement agent in California. Look for Susan's Medicare question and answers every Monday in the Fresno Bee. Call Susan at 559-307-2287 and visit MedicareToday.net.
Well, welcome back, and we're on Dr. Teach Me to Parent, and Toni Eames is my guest today, who is blind and born very severely impaired in her vision and subsequently became totally blind, and telling us her story, telling us how she lived as a child and how she grew up as a child, how her family handled her as a blind child in the home. And I'm going to ask you that question, Toni, in terms of not so much just how you were raised, but What about parents today raising a child that's disabled, blind or hard of hearing, deaf, or a whole host of kind of disabled disabilities? So, what do you tell parents today? What's going on in that world that you would like them to know?
The important thing is not to want the child to be, quote, normal. I remember when I was a little girl on a bus with my mother, and someone asked her, do you have other children? Are they normal? Because people equate a disability with not being a whole person. And what parents have now that my parents didn't have in the 40s is so many more resources, so many more classes, and support groups are very important. People who've gone through it before you did. For instance, when I was a little girl, they didn't teach me to use a cane until I was 16 because they acquainted it with people driving at 16. But nowadays they give preschool blind children canes so they can feel their environment. So when a child is born with a disability, instead of thinking your life is ruined, you have this curse on you, see that the child is a human being, somebody with feelings, and find out what resources are out there for you and your child.
In other words, don't go it alone.
Right.
I mean, that would probably be the worst thing a parent could do, is to just try to handle everything themselves, not consult anybody, don't read any books, don't talk to anybody, don't go to support group, just kind of do it yourself and figure it out yourself. Probably the worst thing a parent can do.
Absolutely. And don't be overprotective. Don't assume that your child can't take swimming lessons because he or she might drown. And I've spoken to people who grew up on farms, and they had chores. They milked the cows, and obviously you can't expect a child, for instance, who doesn't have muscles to carry out the garbage, but maybe they can do something else.
Yes.
But give your child chores so they're part of the family. If every other child has chores, let them set the table. Let them do something that makes them feel that they have chores too. Don't excuse them because they have a disability.
Yeah. I always think that in terms of trying to normalize a child's life. I mean, not think a child's normal or not normal, but that the lifestyle, the living arrangements within the home and within that child's life is normalized. It fits into just the common comings and goings of life.
Right. And don't always talk about, oh, yeah, this is my disabled child.
No.
This, don't make that a point. There's a friend of mine who's married to a man who was born an amputee, and he was adopted. And his adopted mother would always introduce him as, this is my adopted child.
Yes.
Who doesn't have a leg. That's irrelevant.
It's irrelevant.
But on the other hand, you need to have relevance if there's something important that your child needs to know. I mean, you can't so-called normalize a child's life to the point that you're not recognizing the disability. Just don't dwell on it.
Yeah, you can overdo it.
Get
You can
around
overdo
it,
it.
yes.
It becomes almost like an obsession.
Right.
Yeah, and that doesn't help either.
No.
'Cause now you're putting a child into an expectation that can't be fulfilled.
Now, when I was in high school, I took Spanish as my foreign language, and I was a great champion at speaking Spanish. But when I got to college, they said it would be too hard for me to read the books and so on. They might not be available in Braille, and so they made me take another class, not a foreign language class. And in those days, it was before I got my dog, I was very reluctant to stick up for myself. So unfortunately, I lost most of what I had. But again, before you say you can't do this, in fact, the word can't should never be used. What you need to say is, how do you do it differently?
How do you figure out a way?
Yeah.
How do you figure out a way? Yeah.
And it may not be the way other kids do it or other people do it, but it is a way.
Let me ask you this question. What about being assertive? Somebody who's blind, deaf, many forms of disability, really rely on their ability to communicate and assertion, to assert oneself, it seems to me, one of the critical skills that need to be taught. Were you taught to be assertive?
Well, again, it was very dysfunctional. My mother would always say to me, you can ask, and if people don't want to do it, they'll say no, and you're no worse off than you were to begin with.
Well.
Whereas my father would say, how dare you ask people to help you?
Really?
So it was. I was not an assertive child, and I could not explain to other children who teased me that I had limited vision.
But see, that to me is your great disadvantage. Not whether you can see or not, maybe, but if you can't express yourself, if you can't ask for help or assistance or directions or whatever it might be, you're even more impaired.
Absolutely. And parents need to stick up for their children when they call the IEP program in school.
Sure.
And talk about, this is what my child needs. Don't just go ahead with what the teachers think your child needs. Really stand up for your kids. And that's hard for parents. And then it goes down to the children.
Well, I think it's you not only stand up for your kids, but you teach them to stand up for themselves.
Right.
I mean, that's how that's done. I mean, kids learn that by following the example. In this case, your mother was more of an example than was your father.
Right.
I mean, it's almost like you're telling the story about your father telling you what not to do, and your mother telling you what to do.
One of my funniest stories about that, I guess I was an older child, but still less than a teenager. We were in a steak restaurant, and my mother wanted me to go over and touch the stagecoach and show me the wheels and show me where the horse would be attached and show me where the people would sit. And there was this sort of cardboard thing, and I said, well, what's that? And she said, well, that's the do not touch sign. But she always felt that didn't pertain to me. If I learned something, I needed to touch it.
So the sense of feel becomes a very important sense. You always hear that about somebody who's blind, that they develop other senses. Somebody who's deaf, they develop other senses more acutely. Maybe that's how you do it, because you learn to rely on other senses, and they become sharper.
Right, and you don't have them, you learn. And, I am not musical, and when I go to a band concert and all those different instruments are tuning up, I think, how do you know which one is yours? Because I would never have that kind of concentration. But for people who play in an orchestra or a band, that is, what they learn. They can concentrate on their clarinet when everybody else is tuning up. So you learn whatever your skill is. If you're an artist, you learn to see colors and see things. If you're a sculptor, touch becomes very important.
So the brain develops in those areas
exactly.
by learning,
right?
By experience, by doing.
And if you start as a child, you're in much better shape.
But you start as a child because your mother or your father appreciate the importance of relying on other senses, and relying on other means of information, getting information, thinking things through, carrying out tasks. You can't just rely on your vision.
And one parent of a child, friends of mine had a little girl and another child who was in nursery school with her. The parents said, I don't want her to ever experience failure because that would be traumatic. And my friend's parents said, she's never going to develop. That's part of life.
That's part of life.
Is experiencing failure.
Whether you're blind or deaf or disabled in any form, you have to have a failure to learn how to get up again and get going.
Right.
I mean, that's what the purpose of failure is all about. It's measured failure, not traumatic failure.
Right.
It's mild failure. It's moderate failure.
And you can't keep your child from experiencing failure. You have to teach them how to deal with it. Like if other kids are teasing them. I knew one little girl, she was very good. She could say that, well, I'm blind, so I have to do my stuff differently. I could not say that as a little girl.
You said something on numerous occasions here already, and we're going to take a break now and then come back, and maybe you can answer this question. You grew up in a home where mother and father were different. Mother seemed to facilitate your learning, your breadth of experience, moving forward, being assertive, being independent. Father seemed to be a little bit more, I don't know what the word is, punitive or restrictive.
Is a good word, yes.
And it's kind of a negative learning kind of experience. So what if both parents are on the same page? They're really coordinated in telling you the same message as compared to a parent that's giving you two different messages. I wonder what that would have been different in your life if you would have really wanted that to happen in your life. So we'll take a break and you can think about that, and we'll come back and we'll discuss that difference between parenting, because that happens in a lot of homes where mother and dad are not on the same page. So, okay, go get a cup of coffee, and we'll see you in just a couple minutes.
When you need a dentist who has a passion for superior aesthetics and comfort, you need Dr. Christopher Wong with Cedar North Dental. Call 559-432-4948 or visit cedarnorthdental.com.
Trying to close the club. Tanya, come here.
At Boys and Girls Clubs, it's not just about trying new things.
Kitchen, my hometown.
It's not about learning the right steps.
4,
or making contact.
5, 6, 7, 8.
It's not about exploring the future. It's about helping them build it. It's about taking steps to greatness. About making a connection. It's about proving every kid and teen has what it takes. It's about people in our clubs who bring out the greatness in every kid who enters our doors. It's not just about being on stage. It's about walking across it. Great futures start here, and here, and here.
Sat7 is a Christian media network that uses uncensored satellite television to broadcast across the Middle East and North Africa, and is also available globally online.
CentralValleyTalk.com.
Okay, welcome back from your break. We are with Toni Eames, blind, and telling us her story about as a child growing up in a home. Mother and dad were different in how they accepted her as a blind child, and different in how they raised her and the expectations they had for her. But you know, Toni, that's maybe somewhat common to almost any home. Dad has certain expectations and a way of parenting. Mother has expectations and a different way of parenting. And the parents are not on the same page. And kids have distress from that. And we usually think of that as being probably not an appropriate way to parent together as mother and father. It's better to be on the same page and at least give the child a similar or the same message. That was not your experience. You had a father that said one thing, you had a mother that said something a little different. Tell us about that. That must have been confusing for you.
It was, and I was frightened that something would happen to my mother.
Because she was your positive
right,
source of information.
How was I going to cope if something happened to her? So if she was late coming home from work, it just terrified me. And it was not until years later when I was out on my own and went for some therapy that I learned why certain things terrified me, why I was afraid of things. And it was going to the psychologist really made a difference in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing that made a difference in my life is when I got my first guide dog, because I was not happy using a white cane. Some people are really good at it. I'm not. And so the dog was not only company for me, but a safety.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, I started to be able to advocate, not for me, but for the dog. And the first thing I had to deal with was in graduate school. They had some problems with former blind people and dogs. And so they told me, even after I was accepted into Hunter College, that they could not accept me if I insisted upon registering with my dog because they didn't have the right facilities. And I couldn't believe it because all of a sudden I said, don't you have floors? What kind of facilities? And this was different. I was advocating for my dog.
Uh-huh.
And the dean of my program, my rehabilitation counseling program, he said, well, follow the exact thing. They said they wouldn't register you, so leave your dog in the office with me and go register without her.
Oh.
And then attend classes. But even then, I was so afraid that the authorities were going to say, come out of the woodwork and say, we told you you couldn't, come here if you had a dog. But it didn't happen.
You have lived an interesting life relative to guide dogs. And I didn't know that guide dogs was a brand name, by the way. You informed me of that. So that's interesting to know. But over the years, you've lived with a dog as a guide dog and have worked with other people who are in the same situation. And you formed an organization to help in this whole process and to advocate for the blind and for those
with
blind
other
individuals
disabilities,
using dogs and other disabilities as well. You are the president and co-founder of the International Association of Assistance Dog Partnerships. That's kind of a mouthful in itself, but what is that?
Well, it's a consumer advocacy organization where we can help people make a decision about getting a dog, what it's like in the family. If you use a dog, work with a dog, when the family is used to doing things for you. I remember one paralyzed person saying that he had asked his son to get something for him, and he said, Dad, that's what you have a dog for, because dogs can learn all kinds of different tasks for different disabilities. And having a dog in your life is a big responsibility. You have to take the dog out and feed the dog and so on, but what the dog does for you in return is incredible. One of my earliest memories of working with a guide dog, I was back in the Bronx, New York, and I was about to cross this street. And what a blind person does is listen for the sound of traffic, and then you tell your dog forward when you think it's safe. And if it's not safe, the dog will disobey. Well, I stood there probably 3 different lights, and I couldn't tell because there seemed to always be traffic. And my dog suddenly just stepped off the curb, like, if I wait for your command, we'll be here all day, let's go. And, it made me realize how much in tune I was with my dog and how much she paid attention to me.
You got to make a change in that example to guiding your dog to do something as compared to allowing your dog to guide you
right,
to
in that
do something.
Particular situation.
And that's the learning that you have to go through, to rely on that dog and trust.
Because it's teamwork. The dog does not do it all for me.
But it's a trust relationship, isn't it?
Definitely. And it helps you trust other people, too.
That's an interesting point.
And then, of course, if you have a dog in the family and, let's say, the parent is disabled and the kids want to befriend the dog, they want to feed the dog. See, it's very fortunate I can't look in her eyes and have her say, I'm starving, please share that hamburger with me. So I just tell her to go under the table and go away. But, if children in the family or other family members sort of counteract what the dog's been trained to do and feed the dog and so on, then they can ruin it. And Dr. Hedberg said to me, what should people do if they're dog lovers and they see this beautiful dog coming along? The worst thing in the world to do is to come up and pet the dog, because you don't know what the dog's chores are. For instance, if I'm in a store and there are stairs coming up or an escalator and somebody pets my dog and her attention goes away from what she needs to do, I'm in danger. So
that's an interesting point, because I don't think most people think of it that way.
Right.
They think of it as maybe befriending you by befriending your dog.
So the best
they
thing
see it as a positive thing.
To always ask. And some
May I pet your
disabled
dog?
people, some disabled people say no, they never ever let their dog interact. And other people like me love my dog to be petted. And if I'm not actually walking with the handle in my hand, if I'm sitting in an airport and I have a 2-hour wait, why not let her socialize? So people should always ask and not be insulted if they're turned down, because a lot of people don't want that interaction with
They just
their
don't
dogs.
understand that that they're interfering with the process of you and the dog working together to get where you're going.
Right.
So it's a mutual companionship that people become part of, and they have to be very sensitive to that.
And people, I love it when people say to me, "Oh, that's a beautiful dog." The other day I was in Save Mart and somebody said, and I thought it was really clever, said, "Thank you for bringing that dog in. That makes us all feel so happy." He didn't touch her or anything, but I thought it was a lovely comment.
That raises the question. We could talk about safety dogs, companion dogs, therapy dogs, service dogs for a whole hour. I think we need to do a whole program on that.
I agree.
Because I think people really need to understand the difference that dogs play in our life, and particularly in the life of somebody who is impaired in some way, whether it's blind or just emotional or whatever it might be. And you have a lot to say about that. So I think we need to kind of come back and look at that topic just as an issue in itself, because that's a whole hour's program.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but before we go to break, just let me ask you the question in terms of what kind of word do you have for parents that have a situation in their home that is not what you use the word kind of normal. There's some special need that has to be attended,
Addressed.
whether it's blindness or whether it's an emotional anxiety or whatever it might be. I mean, what do you want parents to think first?
Well, I want them first to think, this is my child. And just as your first child might have red hair, and your second child, may not be able to walk or hear, they're different children, but they're still human beings. They're still children, and they have different needs. One child may be, very active and involved in sports. The other child may be very intellectual.
Sure.
But don't discount a child because that child has a disability. Find out what the child is best at doing.
In other words, build on the strength.
Absolutely.
What the child can do, or is able to do, or could learn to do, rather than what is wrong with that child.
Yes, we don't use the word wrong.
That's right.
And we don't use the word can't.
That's right.
They give the example, and it's very clever. You have two little 4-year-old boys, and they're playing fire engines. And the sighted boy says, I'm going to be a fireman when I grow up. And the blind child says, so am I. And the parent says, no, you can't be a fireman. You need to be able to drive, and you need to. The child is 4 years old. If he wants to be a fireman,
let him be.
He'll let him be.
Let him be.
He'll know when he's old enough that might not be the best profession
Reality
for
sets
him.
in at some point, but don't take away hope.
Right.
Don't take away a vision.
Right.
Don't take away a dream. That's what kids need. We need to provide those. We need to introduce dreams and hopes and aspirations in the life of a child. And then reality will kind of direct it. And that's what's happened in your life. We're going to take a break and come back for our last segment. And Toni Eames here is blind and educating us in a very wise and thoughtful way in terms of how to interact with the blind person, the blind community. I want to ask you when we come back, Toni, about the blind in the community. Are we an accepting community? Are we a rejecting community for the blind population and maybe others that are disabled in some form? So let's come back and ask you that question, okay? Get a cup of coffee. Come on back in about 2 minutes, and we'll see you again.
This is my Hey there world, I'd like to introduce you to someone really special and really cool. This is my mom. My mom is an amazing person. She is a writer. She is a newly transplanted Texan. She is a woman of faith and she loves 80s music. She also is a person with a very rare genetic muscular disorder called Pompe disease.
Pompe disease is a terminal, progressive illness. It's a genetic enzyme deficiency which ultimately leads to the destruction of your skeletal muscles. Those are the muscles that control how you move, your arms, your legs, and your torso. When your jaw or esophageal muscles are affected, you can no longer eat and require a feeding tube. When your diaphragm is impacted, you can't breathe on your own any longer and require a trach ventilator. When your legs are impacted, you will no longer be able to walk without assistance. You can lose bladder and bowel control. It affects children and adults, and eventually it kills you. It is rare, but it's real.
Now we're lucky. My mom's still able to walk, though she uses a cane to get around most of the time. She's still able to breathe unassisted, but she can't go upstairs, and she needs some kind of assistance to get up from a seated position, like if she's sitting in a chair. She has to examine every activity ahead of time to know if there are things like handicapped parking, accessible buildings, and even functional bathrooms. All of her activities depend heavily on the weather. A windy day can be just as dangerous as an icy one. She jokes that you can tell what kind of day she's having by whether she can lift her arms high enough to do her hair. And she recently moved into a one-story house specifically with the idea that she's one day going to need a wheelchair to get around. Those are the kind of things she has as everyday concerns. Her normal everyday fears are things like dropping her keys or falling in public and not being able to get up. That actually happened a couple of years ago. She fell and fractured her pelvis because she was unable to break her fall.
I receive an enzyme replacement therapy every 2 weeks for life. It's a 6-hour IV. It helps slow the progression of the disease, but it is not a cure. And it costs about $100,000 every time you sit in a chair. Insurance takes care of most of that if you're lucky, but not everyone is, and the expenses add up very quickly. Things like wheelchairs, accessible vehicles, special housing, travel costs to medical conferences, doctor's appointments, and clinical trials. Luckily, there is a group that helps families with Pompe handle these costs. The United Pompe Foundation is a group connecting funds with real people who need help. This was founded by a father whose son has Pompe disease, and they could not find the resources that they needed. They assist patients and their families with medical costs and other expenses that they need to survive day to day. Every little bit helps.
There are a lot of things in life that we really take for granted, and sometimes the scariest things in the world are the things that you can't see. So today we're asking for you to help us shed a little light on a rare and scary disease. Please share this video with your friends, your family, strangers, anybody that you come across. Education is a big thing. It makes a big difference. And another way to make a really huge difference in someone's life is to go check out the United Pompe Foundation. Their website is in this video description. Click on it, check it out, and go ahead and donate some money if you're able to. Again, this is an organization giving real help to real people who are amazing and need it, like my mom. I love her, and thank you so much for helping us out. Thank you so much.
CentralValleyTalk.com.
Okay, welcome back, and we're picking up our discussion with Toni Eames, blind, and her little dog with us, Adora. She's a great little dog, and she's just kind of enjoying the day and listening as we talk about her and talk about Toni. And before the break, Toni, I raised the question about the blind in our community, the disabled person in our community. Is our community rejecting, or is our community supportive and accepting of people who are disabled in one form or another?
I think it's improved. Certainly the law has gotten people to be more aware of people who are disabled, but there's still a lot of rejection. You know, when I was applying for my first job after graduate school, many rehabilitation agencies said, you know, well, I don't know how you'll handle the paperwork, or, you know, how are you going to get here? There were all kinds of things like that. And so I was constantly sort of defending myself.
Sure.
And when I
Yeah.
finally applied to Kings Park Psychiatric Center, my supervisor asked me more important questions about how I felt about working with the mentally ill and what experiences I had. And I said, you know, aren't you curious about the paperwork? And he said, no, you got through graduate school, you must have your techniques. So, you know, he was a gem.
Sure.
Because he didn't
Well, he understood.
concentrate
He
on all those
appreciated
things.
it. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But certainly the law has made it easier for people to get jobs, but there's still a great deal of rejection. A lot of disabled people get through college and then nobody wants to hire them because they might have to make a small change in how they do things.
So we have the ADA laws that facilitate the disabled person in our community, and we try to not only just to protect them, but to encourage independence. Is it working?
It's working, but not to the degree that we would like it to be. You know, at one point, people were objecting to curb cuts and said, you know, how many people in wheelchairs are going to bother? Who needs it? But if you can't get on the bus because you can't get across the street, then your ability to choose a job is very limited. Right. So a lot of the things that people find, who's going to be here and who's going to care about the traffic lights that talk and whatever other stuff we've put into our system.
We are a community of cost effectiveness. If 100 people benefit from something, we think, oh, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
If one person benefits from it, we think, that's a waste of money.
Yeah. And,
right?
And I just heard, well, I was going to say that there are so many situations where people have participated in sports. This one man who's totally blind, and he was the first blind person to climb Mount Everest.
Yes.
There's also a woman who lost her arm from a shark attack.
Yes.
And her father came up with some kind of system, an artificial arm that would help her swim, and she was a champion swimmer. Mm-hmm. And you've heard about people who run on their artificial legs and so on.
The creativity that it promotes is enormous. I remember the gal here locally that played volleyball as a blind person, and the ball had a bell in it. Yeah. And so that she could know where the ball was. It was able to play volleyball.
And it doesn't mean, you know, there's no way in the world you'd have me climbing a mountain. It's just not my interest.
No.
But if it is the interest of someone, you should not say it can't be done.
Got to find a way.
And
got to find a way
so
to get
society,
it done.
I heard a great story. A woman who had only recently become disabled, and she was in a wheelchair, and she was very, very conscious of being in the wheelchair. And she was in the mall, and this little girl kept circling her, and the woman in the wheelchair was getting angrier and angrier, like parents should teach their kids better. And finally, this little girl, about 6, said, you know what? My mommy has the exact same earrings as you do. Because the child did not see the wheelchair as so negative.
No.
Parents tend to pull their children away when they ask, you know, why does that person have a dog with her? Why does that person have a cane? You know, why is that person in a wheelchair? And language, oh my goodness, you're not confined to a wheelchair, and you're not wheelchair bound.
How can you help? What suggestion do you have for people to feel more comfortable when they're in the presence of somebody who is disabled? And stay with the idea of being blind. When you're on the mall, when you're out in public, and you do a lot of that yourself, how do you help people feel comfortable with you and around you? And what can people do to feel more comfortable so that it's more natural?
To see me as a person, I'm a knitter. And I was knitting one day, and so often people come on that is so amazing.
Wow.
You're blind, blah, blah, blah. Well, this woman came up to me and she said, I've never knitted with that yarn. Is it easy to knit with? You know, how is it on the needles? And, you know, is it washable? And I thought, wow, we're having a nice, regular conversation.
That was more normalized
from one-
conversation, yeah.
Yeah, from one knitter to another.
Sure.
So, you know, your best bet if you're outgoing and you want to talk to someone is don't start with the disability and don't start with, well, how did this happen to you? But start with something, you know,
that's
gee,
more
you know,
neutral, or
yeah.
that's mutual between the two of you.
Right. You know, I love those shoes that you're wearing. Are they comfortable? Leave the disability out of it because, in a certain sense, it's none of your business to know the details unless you become friends.
Sure.
So don't hesitate to have a conversation because you don't quite know how to do it. You know, don't come up and say, well, gee, I've never met a blind person before, so I'm feeling a bit awkward, because that immediately puts me feeling awkward, and I have to then, you know, do something to calm you down. But if you come over and...
You're the therapist now in that
Yeah.
case, yes. But, you know, I think it's an interesting point is that you can do some things to help people feel comfortable, and then in the future they'll treat other people more comfortably. So you're helping the process a little bit. But I don't know if that's your responsibility totally.
Right. And
But
you
we all
want-
can do things to, and I think it's part of being assertive. Just meet your fear. If you're uncomfortable, go forward. Just introduce yourself and become part of the process and part of the conversation. The fear will go away.
And I always say what gets on my nerves is when somebody will start a conversation by saying, well, you can't do such and such.
Yes.
Can you? You're blind. Or if they say to me, you know, do you cook or do you...
How do you
how
do
do
it?
you do it? How do
Yeah.
you do it? And then I can answer. But when they start out by assuming I can't do it, that puts me on edge, and I don't want to have the conversation.
That's very interesting to help people overcome that, their own fears. And I think it's out of fear that they speak.
Absolutely.
And out of their ignorance. They really have not interacted with somebody who is blind. So therefore, they do this in kind of like their first time. They're awkward.
Right.
Maybe you know, a blind person can just say, just relax, it's okay, or we can handle this.
Or people who change the language. They're afraid to say blind, so they say non-sighted or visually impaired. Or one time I was putting somebody on who worked in my veterinarian's office, and he said, do you mind if I ask a personal question? He said, were you born that way?
Sure.
And I said, oh, yeah, I was born a girl. You know, I just was putting him on because he just couldn't ask the question. And I finally said, why don't you just come right out and say
Just
well,
come
you're
out and
born
say
blind,
it.
you know?
Yeah. Well, you're comfortable with it. I mean, I don't know. Would that be true of all blind people?
No.
I mean, what, half of them are very comfortable being blind, interacting with their community, and other half are not, or what's the breakdown?
Well, I'd say people who are newly disabled are much less comfortable with it because they're adjusting to their own prejudices and
Sure.
their own fears. And people who were born with a disability, and particularly getting back to the parenting, whose parents gave them the courage to do what they needed to do as a disabled person, are much more open to accepting people's questions and dealing with social interactions.
Sure. Well, you know, you have led us down a path today that's very educational, and very, very informative, but personally rewarding. I think that you're an example of positive success as a blind person. I mean, you live it well, and you teach it well, and you encourage it. And I assume hundreds of people have learned from you. Maybe not in the formal classroom, but in life experiences as you've interacted with them. That's part of your life, isn't it?
Yes, very
Have you done it all your life?
Yeah. Well, not all my life. As I said, I was not that open until I got my first dog, and then advocating for her got me to advocate for me.
Well, that gives us a good segue to end the program today. We've been talking to Toni Eames, blind, but walking us down the lane of what it's like to live in a home with a blind person, a disabled person, what it's like to live that life, what it's like to interact with the community, how to become part of process of expansion of your own life, personal life, as well as helping other people expand their life and include you as part of their life. And you are a person who includes a lot of people in your life. And you have a lot of people that help you and support you and encourage you.
Yes.
These are your friends.
Yes.
You've done very well
at that. I make them into friends, yes.
So I'd like to end with a quote and put this into perspective of what we've been talking about today, Toni. Maybe you can just make a comment about this little quote itself. An animal's love is one of the purest things in the universe. An animal's love. You have a dog. You've had many dogs.
I also live with 6 cats and a little pet dog. So.
Okay, so an animal's love is one of the purest things in the universe. Tell us about that. Is that true?
I think that's very true, and that's why it's our responsibility to treat those animals well. And the degree of abuse of animals, or negating the fact that they have feelings, is very sad to me, because they can be absolutely the most loving. And somebody says they come home from work and the wife is in the kitchen cooking and the kids are doing homework, and it's the dog who says, "Oh, yay, you're home." So I would say, animals do give this, so treat them well. Understand that they are sentient beings.
It's hard to understand a family, a child growing up without an animal. A dog, cat, turtle, or whatever. It's a way of learning how to relate to other people and to other things and the world beyond.
Oh, I had a
beyond
pet
yourself.
dog, I had a turtle, I had a parakeet.
Yeah, we've had the same thing. We've had all the animals that you can think of. And it enriches your life. Anyway, thanks for joining us today on Dr. Teach Me to Parent. Remember, get a hold of the book, Dr. Teach Me to Parent. And just go to Amazon or go to my website, www.drteachmetoparent, and it's under booksbyhedberg.com. So if you can do that, I think you'll have a rich source of learning and reading ahead of you to enrich yourself as a parent and become a much better, more effective parent in your life. So thanks for joining us today. And thank you, Toni, for being our guest today.
Yes,
thank you very much. And Adora, thank you for being here as the dog of choice today, right? So thank you very much. She earned her keep today. Okay, bye for now.
CentralValleyTalk.com.
The Green Gables Care Home is a 24-hour assisted living facility for the elderly located in Clovis, California, offering spacious private and semi-private rooms which are wheelchair approved, catering to the special person in your life who needs attention and wants to live in a loving home environment. The Green Gables Care Home has assisted living in secured homes for elderly with Alzheimer's, memory loss, and for your loved ones needing assistance with their activities of daily living. Call 559-297-9438 and visit greengablescarehome.com.